Hello, everyone. And we're excited to be coming in as interlocutors to Momentum Lab, where it's great to see you all there making and momentumizing. I'm joined here with two dear friends, Stephanie Guilloud and Rachel Herzing. And we're going to have a quick conversation about what this question we've been asking inside the studio is, who is the state for? And the subtext or the subtitle of this talk is Beyond the Duopoly. And I wanted to get my dear friend's opinion on this because right now we see lots of momentum around a sort of critique and refusal to accept either side of the political arrangement we find ourselves in, that being the neoliberal agenda of the Democratic Party and the fascist agenda of the Republican Party. One could make a case that they're two sides of the same coin. Um, and we see in social media and in lots of other spaces that there's a interest in rejecting both of these parties and their politics in social spaces and cultural spaces. And one of the things I'm really interested in is how might we continue to build this momentum towards something akin to movement. And so I wanted to talk to two movement elders, well, not elders, well, two senior movement practitioners. I think that'd be the best way to describe it. Stephanie Guilloud is the movement organizing senior strategist at Project South. Stephanie brings close to 3 decades of organizing experience and leadership in Southern movement and global justice work. She was also pivotal in the Seattle work against NAFTA. From 2008 to 2022, Stephanie served as the co-director of Project South and recently has repositioned to senior strategist in the movement organizing work of the organization. We're also joined by our dear friend Rachel Herzing, who is the director of the Yarrow Institute for Organizing and Analysis and is co-author with Justin Pinche of How to Abolish Prisons, Lessons from the Movement Against Imprisonment, and is a longtime abolitionist. So with that, one of the things I wanted to say to sort of cue them up, we're going to hear from Stephanie first, and then we'll hear from Rachel, is how might we take advantage of what we're seeing, at least in the social media context, and I think in our conversations, a kind of disillusionment with both sides of the political spectrum. I'm wondering how might we galvanize this disillusionment into something that can actually challenge the way in which current political arrangements make us continue to say we have to pick the lesser of two evils. When we see that both sides are evil, is there a way that right now we might be able to reject them both? And if so, what are the possibilities for that? And how might we build national movement towards that? Um, Both of our distinguished friends will have about 6 minutes or so to pontificate on this question. We will turn it over to you all to ask a few questions, and we'll be out of here by 2 o'clock your time, one my time. I'm in Mexico City. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie first.
Awesome. And it's I'm super proud and glad to be with you all at the design studio. And it was good just to see a little bit of the hubbub over there. Really grateful to be part of this conversation and, trying to imagine kind of the work that you all are doing there in the design studio and also thinking about this conversation as if we would have it over happy hour. So I'm just kind of imagining a couple cocktails and going in deep, because I think as organizers we need to take some time, and I think we are working really hard to make sense of and make meaning of these moments that are happening right now. And there's a lot to learn almost every day, every week in this period. It's moving super fast. And we're not wrong to feel really bombarded and overwhelmed. And that's certainly a tactic. And we have to pace ourselves. And so I think that this momentum, this question, these labs that y'all are doing is right on time. So taking space and gathering to get a minute and work some of this out for ourselves. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share and connect. And I just wanted to kind of start zoomed out a little bit and just how I understand the state itself, this multi-pronged apparatus of government institutions that uses public money via tax bases to control and facilitate power arrangements, usually, at least in this case, via the ruling class, sometimes maybe somewhere else for the collective good. But the state in the 21st century is a kind of long-term crisis after each of these acute crises subside. And I think we're seeing that in the supposed ceasefire in Gaza. That means very little after 2 years of genocidal attempts to annihilate the Palestinian people and their liberation movements. We're also just watching the advances in the West Bank and other places in the region. And all the way to Minneapolis. We're watching Operation Metro Surge, which was massive, and an unprecedented deployment of 3,000 ICE agents descending on these cities for 2 months, a siege that resulted in over at least 4,000 abductions and detainments, multiple shootings, and 2 murders. That supposedly is over as well, but we know that this is not, these narrative tricks are not the case and not real in terms of what we're really up against. And so kind of naming, and I think what Kenny's asking us to name is that we're really at a crossroads, and we could galvanize that, but we're at a crossroads in our relationship to the state. So we need all of our skills, analysis, history, but especially cultural workers and folks who are trained to imagine a way forward. So that's my hope for this conversation. And I feel like thinking about the duopoly and thinking about the binary, I just wanted to offer a couple of thoughts to get us towards that pathway and towards that vision. And for me, when Trump was elected this second time, it felt like there were 2 camps. And one was, and in this binary, I'm simplifying it a little bit, but we just have to endure this for the next 4 years. So that was one. And then the other, with organizers and folks to me who were really plugged in and on the ground and accountable to a bigger base, we're never going back. That was the other. That was a camp, and I was always in that one. We're never going back, and many of us who've been enduring these horrors of these systems for many decades would say we don't want to go back. So in this moment, in this crossroads, how do we forge new paths forward? So if we're not going back, and that to me implies rejection of both the neoliberal order and the fascists. One trap is seeing that that's just tied to the parties and naming the 2-party system as the problem rather than the entirety of the U.S. state apparatus. And the U.S. state apparatus, I say that because it's unique in the world, and we're in a unique position as social movements here, that it requires, and it's going to require, a really deep rigor and seriousness where we work, and deep rigor and seriousness in connecting globally and understanding how this is operating across the whole world. So we know that the U.S. state functions as a capitalist state, a colonialist state, and imperialist state. And it functions to control populations in all the ways, physically, ideologically, politically, and to facilitate corporate power to control resources, land, water, now data, in ways that we haven't even understood yet. So we're seeing, and I'm not versed enough to speak to state capture definitively, but we can certainly see that the different forces of white nationalism, Christian nationalism, and tech enterprises are consolidating rapidly to capture the primary mechanisms of the state. So at this crossroads, we have to see that something's breaking open. Minneapolis gives us a glimpse There's a glimpse in cities like Chicago's mayor and labor infrastructure. That co-governance model is pretty incredible in producing real wins and material change for people via the Chicago Teachers Union and other contract victories. Mamdani's offering another example. And these are state-based solutions that are full of possibility and also contradictions. And we have to pay attention to all of that. In the South, where I'm based, so much of the public infrastructure has already been captured. Our municipalities, and there's potential there, but it's just not, it's hostile. It's a hostile terrain, just as hostile sometimes as the federal. And so we have to look back to, I think we do, is look into and rely heavily on examples from the Black radical traditions, specifically Black Reconstruction as a time when this was functioning at a wildly large scale in terms of resource and governance systems. That infrastructure, we call it parallel infrastructure, I think can help us harness, and these lessons can help us harness people's disillusionment with the state, that we're building what we need, but we refuse to comply and cooperate with the state and its agents. And I think that's, ICE is one aspect, but there are many other deployments and there are many other ways that people are getting policed. And so the last little piece I want to name, because the binary, the gender binary is so critical, and it's such a bedrock for colonialism, for the technology of imperialism, good, bad, civilized, savage. It's a place that we can see both where they're attacking and using gender as a front line in the Trump regime, as a small population to target and test surveillance and restrictions in healthcare, schools, public space. But it's also the source of how we could build our resistance, because we know transgender, non-binary people exist and the power of the state cannot change that, but it can criminalize. It can criminalize gender and people who live beyond that binary. And that's a kind of power that we have to contend with and confront. So that's an example, and that was a place that we're starting to see, like, it's not about identity, and there's a lot of barriers between communities, but if we can understand that so many of us are being criminalized, including protest itself and organizers and people who hold radical ideas about this country, there are opportunities for us to see ourselves in a shared reality and counter the state with several movement strategies, one being direct confrontation, two being to build parallel infrastructure, and three, to put forth a bigger vision of what we're building and start to rework these arrangements from where they are now to where we want them to be. And that means reworking body, reworking work, reworking land, working culture, spirit in new ways, decolonizing that in not a shallow practice, but in a much more robust way of reimagining and then practicing those reimaginations in our public life and in our institutions. So I'll pause there, but just wanted to offer a couple of those ideas and potential pathways and strategies towards that bigger vision, because we're going to have that if we're going to galvanize at any large scale. And I think the practitioners of culture, of organizing, of world building are perfectly positioned to help us do that.
Thanks, Steph. Going to turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Kenny, and thanks everybody for the invitation to be here today. I'm not going to say a whole lot different, I don't think, from you, Steph. I believe many of the same kinds of things that you raised are on my mind, but I might come in at a slightly different way. So I'm thinking about this period as a period of intersecting crises. Some people are talking about this as a period of polycrisis, right? But I'm thinking about the ways that the crises that we're facing are not only intersecting, but mutually enforcing. And among those, I'm also thinking about a crisis of legitimacy that is facing the state formation that we live under in the United States right now. And these crises are destabilizing our daily lives. And they're also destabilizing the norms that many people have come to rely on, are challenging our common sense about reality, even in some cases. But the other thing about crisis is that crises always also present opportunities. And so I want to talk about two sets of the many potential sets of opportunities that might galvanize us in this period. So the first is an opportunity to galvanize people around common experiences. So we're living in this period of economic crisis, for instance, right? Many of us are facing serious economic challenges, whether that's the cost of eggs or the cost of rent or the suppression of wages or the erosion of the kinds of protections that we would get through unionization. And there are opportunities there in shared pain points to understand a shared fate. Similarly, this common experience of fear. A lot of people are living with high levels of fear right now, whether that's from the kind of criminalization that Steph talked about, fear of repression from cops at all scales, from local cops to ICE and everybody in between, increasing pressure to suppress race, ethnicity, gender, religion in the so-called war on woke, and fear of the violence of non-state actors, far-right non-state actors, whether those are vigilantes or organized white supremacist groups. All of that is real stuff that I think it can be a galvanizing force. And finally, a shared experience of determination that I think we're seeing across the country and across the world to defend our communities, to defend our neighbors, our families, to uphold ideas about what we might think democracy is, for instance. Determination to stick together and to work through collaborative formations. And we've seen that from Los Angeles to Chicago to Minneapolis. We've seen that to Brazil, Philippines, India, across the world. So that we can stick together and be more well together. I think there's also an opportunity, a set of opportunities around shaping the future. The state formation that we live under in the United States, and that Steph did a really, really good job of describing, I think in some detail, is not the only formation the state has to take. A state could be a cooperative structure. It could be structured for the benefit of the many rather than the few. It could be organized around cooperative economics rather than capitalist economics. And also, I think we do well to remind ourselves that the state is not only the two parties, it's not only the government, but it's schools and the postal service and public libraries and road maintenance. Many, many things make up the state. Also, the state is maintained and animated by people. It doesn't have a life of its own. There are people inside of it working to maintain it and exercise the force of it inside. And those people have the opportunity and the potential to reshape it. So thinking about mail carriers, or thinking about all the federal employees that got laid off at the beginning of last year, or thinking about all the poll workers who are kind of holding a line. There are a lot of people who could be mobilized and galvanized in service of a different future. And also there's the opportunity to confront the question of whether or not we, on the movement side of things, need new ways of being together and of contending for power. The old ways may not be serving us anymore. And, people who are involved in creative pursuits and designing new futures are essential to this conversation as we think as expansively and creatively as we can about new terms of engagement, new arrangements for living and being. The state is in a crisis of legitimacy right now. There is a lever to push there. We need to confront global capitalism if we're going to do that, and by extension, its imperialism, and to exercise a certain amount of non-cooperation, I think, is really essential here if we're going to reject both the neoliberal order and a fascist order. An exercise of coordinated non-cooperation, I think, is also really, really essential. And I'll stop there.
Wow. You guys were so succinct. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's like 12:50 on the nose. We've got our 10 minutes for our questions. So I'm going to ask Raquel to open the room again and to see if there are any people there that would like to ask a question.
Thank you so much. Here, I'm going to ask anyone who has a question if they're willing to step in front of the camera so that our panel can see. That would be great. And then you can hold this while you ask.
Thank you both for your comments. Hi, Kenny.
Hi, David.
I was just wondering about what your views are on boycotts as a form of resistance in this moment. You know, I don't know. I was just thinking about like at the local level, like I live in JP, Jamaica Plain here in Boston, and you know, our street is a bunch of leftists, but I still see Amazon trucks coming down the street all the time, and we know that how they're supporting ICE and the fascist state. And a real simple thing is not shopping at Whole Foods or is not. And if we could do that at a mass level, like what is that impact? And I don't know. I'm not saying that's the solution on its own, but I'm kind of curious both of your opinions on that as one tactic in this movement.
I can start there if you don't mind, Steph. Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question. I tend to believe in boycotts and divestment as powerful tools. And I think historically there are really great examples there. But also in the contemporary period, I think we've seen them used to really, really good effect against these ICE operations. So Minneapolis is just the most recent of these examples. You know, I think about what Sunrise Movement has been doing by doing very, very targeted corporate campaigns against, you know, people renting cars to ICE agents, against the hotels where they're being housed, and doing things like reserving hotel rooms and then releasing them, and reserving them again and releasing them, and you know, just so that the hotels stay booked up, or that the car reservations stay booked up so that the ICE doesn't have access to them. And similarly, the kinds of noise protests that we've seen, you know, kind of bolster that. It's not boycott activity exactly, but a corporate targeting. And, you know, we've seen that also around like Target and Walmart, the impact that can have when people withhold their dollars from those capitalist behemoths. It really does have an impact. I think they have to be coordinated with other pressure points to be their most effective. And I think, you know, Amazon in particular is a really tricky one because let's be honest, Jeff Bezos owns every goddamn thing, right? So every time you get on the internet, Amazon runs your back end. So right now, you know, Amazon's making some money off of us, you know? So I think we need to be targeted in the way that we use that leverage. I think it's really important and impactful leverage, but I think we have to be targeted and we have to bundle it with other kinds of tactics as well.
Yeah, I agree. And sustained is the only other word I would use, like that it can't be sort of a little bit at a time or one day at a time. I think we studied the Montgomery bus boycott, the United Farm Workers, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. It is long-term, sustained, targeted boycott divestment strategies that really work. And I do think there's opportunities within sort of the technology and data world of things. We're going to have to find new leverage points. It's not going to be just as easy as not shopping at Amazon, like Rachel just described. So I think we're going to have to, and I think it could be a part of our creative endeavor to figure out where are our leverage points right now and where are entry points for people to make that are relatively easy from their homes, and then all the way to very uncomfortable or very, difficult to sustain, because both and is going to grow our numbers. It's going to allow us to be in some of that shared movement work together. So I think it's a great question. And I think we need to be, pulling from looking at history and also really looking at new kinds of leverage points that we have to consider given our role in the data capture and our phones and all that kind of stuff. And so I think to me, it would be, it's not as easy as just saying not this or we don't shop here, but more like how could we really study that, look at it. I think the labor movement is offering, with the May Day strikes and strike preparedness, some potential ways forward on the May Day type tests for movement to figure out. And I think, at least for us in the South, where there's not as much labor, organized, unionized labor movement, but there is worker movement happening, how are we connecting and combining young people, folks that are all not necessarily in formal work, as part of and taking action in that kind of a strike? And how long can those strikes last that will really give us a sense of and actual power? And then what is on the other side of it? I think that has to keep being our conversation. Like, we can make interventions, and what are we building on the other side so that that vacuum doesn't get filled immediately? Because I do think we're potentially going to be able to galvanize a lot of this energy, but if we don't have a vision and a blueprint that we're moving from in that longer term view, we're in a different kind of danger.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Listen, step right into that.
My question is, like you said, the state is animated and it's like moved by people. And something I've been pondering on is like, how do I remove myself from the participation of the state? Like, how do I stop using money? How do I stop paying taxes for my house? So on and so forth. And like, maybe that's something that like I could possibly do with like a lot of risk, so on and so forth, talking to people. But my question is in terms of like giving the community and the public tiers of engagement to move to that place eventually. Like, what does that look like? What has been successful in the past, and like slowly engaging people into like Black radical tradition? I mean, like, hey, this thing is actually hurting you. Maybe you can't see it right now, but what is that conversation and process like of weaning people off the state?
I mean, one thing I saw in Minneapolis, I was just out there, and like what I saw that I think could be an easy first step that folks everywhere could start to move on is the places that we are, like that we create protection and we refuse entry, like in a very simple way, that there is sort of the non-cooperation, non-compliance with the actual agents and even the laws that they're trying to impose. And how can we do that at our schools, if we're parents, at our teachers or students? How can we do that? I mean, I saw it at the kung fu school that was for like lots of little kids, but it's like no federal agents are allowed in this building, and it takes a bunch of steps to make that sign real. But that in and of itself creates a kind of protection, and it's a kind of practice to figure out how to do that confrontation. And then there's other, like Rachel was saying, and I think others and y'all agree, like there's going to have to be multiple tactics and strategies all at the same time that are moving. But the more coordinated we can be, the better. And I think the more we can protect the spaces, that then becomes the potential structures that are cooperative. Now we've got some practice in governing those spaces and making some decisions about who enters, who doesn't, how we're protecting each other as we move through the day in our regular lives. So that's a thought there of how to disinvest from the state by protecting the places and people that we love.
Yeah, I would add that I think there's also a question for me about opting out of the state versus compelling the state to do different or play certain kinds of roles, right? So I think in the examples that you were giving, Steph, 100% agree with that. And I think there are many, many good examples of those practices happening across the United States, across the world right now, where people are building, different kinds of COP-free zones, and then, working together to build up both the practices and the infrastructure to be able to maintain those. And I'm also thinking about, you were referencing in your question the Black radical tradition. And a lot of the Black radical tradition was not about opting out of the state and creating something completely different, but was trying to figure out how to get different points of leverage, different fissures to worm into and explode out to contend for power more directly. So to say, it wasn't like we're not going to vote. What it was is like, we got to figure out how to get in there to get the vote in order to do other things. So the vote wasn't the ultimate goal there. Power was the ultimate goal there, right? So I think the question for me is really opt out toward what end, or stay and fight toward what end? And, basing the decisions on kind of what the end game is there. And if you're trying to, create something entirely separate, or if you're trying to stay in and contest for power.
On the money, not a minute, half a minute over. That was perfect. Well, thank you both for joining us for this conversation inside of Momentum Lab. I hope you guys are making posters or buttons with the question, who is the state for? And more to come. We have to do some more rounds of this, you guys. This is so good. And we'll let you guys get back to it in the space. Thanks so much for letting us pop in for 30 minutes.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Hopefully it was helpful.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Bye. Yeah.